My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of the RECO12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am living the happy, joyous, and free life that is promised to those living in recovery and have been very active in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013. Welcome to the 123rd meeting of RECO12, 123, love it, of RECO12. RECO12 is an organization with a mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds and the similarities of recovery from all afflictions and addictions, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are trudging this road. We are an open meeting for all, no matter your life experiences, faith traditions, nationality, addiction, or background. To learn more about RECO12, please go to RECO12.com. That's www.reco12.com. RECO12 appreciates your help in keeping us working our 12th step and are grateful to receive donations to cover Zoom and podcast overhead costs. I'll put the information and links in the chat of the live meeting, as well as in the show notes of the podcast if you wish to contribute to this cause. If RECO12 is a meaningful tool for you in your recovery walk, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast in your podcast platform of your choice. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers, from their higher power. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. I'm excited to hear from this week's guest, Pete B. I've just recently been introduced to him, and I'm grateful to have this connection. His topic is one that I find very important to my own recovery, and that is sponsorship. Now, here's a little bit more about Pete in his own words. He says, I've been in 12-step recovery since age 22, continually abstinent from all mind and mood-altering substances since 1980 at the age of 25. I've had a fascinating journey, and I'm excited to hear about this, that's taken me through about 10 different recovery fellowships, including NA, AA, Addicts Anonymous, All Addicts Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Al-Anon, Adult Children of Alcoholics, Freedom from Fear, Refuge Recovery, and Recovery Dharma. I got to help NA create its basic text on recovery early on and establish several NA newsletters. More recently, I was the editor for an AA newsletter. Today, I find myself back in NA, where my recovery journey began. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I have found myself privileged to actively sponsor addicts all over the world through the 12 steps, including 6 different countries and 7 different states. I've probably learned more about sponsorship in the last 3 years than I had in the previous 39. Pete, we're excited to hear from you. Take it away. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Justin. I'm really grateful and humbled to be here. I learned about you guys through my sponsee from Moscow, Russia. He's not there anymore, but so you guys are reaching pretty far, which is pretty awesome. I love the age we're in now, where we have this the ability to reach across what used to be lines that separated us. So anyway, I am an addict. I started my my career as an addict at the age of 15, and I went strong until the age of I stopped drinking when I was 22, thinking that was my problem, and I started my recovery journey in AA. But I was still getting high, and back then nobody ever talked about it. You didn't know anything about it. It just, I thought I wasn't drinking. I was fine. I started getting back on my feet, and then things were starting to spin out of control in my life. And I lost my best friend when we were both 24. He had just brought me back from an out-of-body experience 5 days before he died. He had Hodgkin's disease, and he got pneumonia, and it killed him. And I spent a long, lonely winter getting high. I stopped going to meetings altogether. I just got high. My addiction was really out of control. And, one night I just, I felt this overwhelming sense of loneliness, and I just cried out, God, I'm alone. And I looked over, and the big book of AA was sitting on my kitchen counter, and I'd gotten it 2 years before, and I'd gone to meetings, but I'd never opened that book. And I opened the book. I'm high as a kite, too. I opened the book, and I started reading, and it was like, Bill Wilson just reached right into my soul and pulled out my humanity. I no longer felt alone reading that book. So I said, oh, I must have missed something in those meetings. So I put away the drugs, and went back to the meetings, and I was still having some trouble finding that connection that I felt reading that book in the meetings. And then in one meeting, I found something that led me to my recovery, and that was another addict. And I went up to him afterwards because something about the way he shared was different, and I said as much. I usually wasn't one to go up to people. I was just going to meetings and not drinking. And I thought that was the deal. That's what you did, and you'd feel better, and then you wouldn't drink. And this guy told me about NA, and I didn't think I was that bad. I didn't think drugs were that big of a problem for me, but I said, okay, I'll give it a try. He said there were younger people, and so I go to my first NA meeting. Now I'm 25. Disabled veteran, been through a couple of near-death experiences, been around the world. And I walk into this room full of kids. They were all teenagers. They were acting like teenagers. I was used to being the young guy in the other meetings, and I was clearly the oldest one in that room. And I'm sitting there through the first half of the meeting wondering, what the heck am I doing here? And all I saw was a bunch of immature teenagers. At the break, I went out to get a cup of coffee, and I was seriously considering walking out of that meeting when this one kid walked out and introduced himself to me. He reached out to me. He connected with me. And I walked back into the meeting. And as I was walking back in, and today I believe this came from my higher power, but at the time, the thought occurred to me. I heard somewhere that I stopped growing emotionally the day that I started using. And I started using when I was 14, regularly when I was 15. So I just immediately, my brain just said, well, then you're right here with these guys. Why don't you stop judging and start listening? And the second half of that meeting just blew me away. I'm hearing these kids share from the heart. I didn't even know how to do that. I didn't know what they were, I just kept saying, yeah, me too. And I went home from that meeting, and I felt something that I didn't. It took me about a half hour to figure out what I was feeling, and what I was feeling was hope. I hadn't dared consider hope since the it was about early in my active addiction that I had this realization that I was trapped by addiction, and at some point I'd just given myself over to it, and I never felt hope again after that until that night. And I went back the next day, and they had a step meeting. Yeah, and it was unbelievable. They're talking about the steps, and this one kid in particular seemed like he really knew what he was talking about. And there's something about, he just glowed when he talked. So I asked him to sponsor me, and he walked me through. He was just very kind. He took the time to get to know me. He walked with me through the first 5 steps. And in the 5th step, I shared with him, I had some things that I'd done in the Navy that I was definitely taking it to my grave with me. And they came out in that 5th step. And I felt so light and so connected to my humanity that I'd never felt before. And then he told me that's as far as he'd gotten. And, he was at that point, his sponsor was also a therapist, and he was in therapy with his sponsor. So I said, oh, I'll try that. He didn't suggest it, but I just said, okay, let me. And 2 sessions of therapy sent me screaming into the night. I had started to feel this warm glow inside working with him on the steps. And suddenly I just was like, I was a mess. And this other kid, the kid that had reached out to me in that first meeting, just suggested I get more involved in service. And that's what I did, because there wasn't anybody else around in NA at that time in 1980. There just wasn't many people that had the 12-step experience. And NA was addressing a problem that it had been around for 27 years using the AA literature the whole time. And they realized they had a problem with identification. So they were starting a process to write their own big book. They called it the basic text for recovery. And at that time, they hadn't even really begun. They were just laying the groundwork to start writing the book. And that little group of teenagers, there's a couple of us that were over 20, made a decision, to stop violating the 6th tradition and using this outside literature in their meeting, because they were using the AA 12 and 12. And instead of stopping being a step meeting, they decided to write their own steps. And I just had come back from a relapse, and I became the group secretary because George said get involved, so I got involved. And I had typing skills, so we would meet in the guy's apartment and talk about we'd talk about each step, and then we would record it and I'd transcribe it, and then that's how I got involved in the work on the book. And that pretty much kept me out of trouble for the first 2 years clean. I could type, and I had editing skills, and I just kept pouring it into that effort. And back then I did sponsor a number of people during that time, and back then it was like if you had a few months clean, then you had you were sponsoring people, because NA tripled in size in the year of 1981. It went from 600 meetings to 1,800 in 1 year. And, so we had a lot of newcomers coming in. So we were just doing the best we could, but we didn't really know what we were doing. And, I got very involved with the service. I did, and I had what I've since come to know as service-based recovery, which is fine. And I got to do a lot. I got to be part of writing this book that now is all over the world and helping millions of addicts and all that. And that's gratifying, but I didn't have personal recovery. I still hadn't looked at myself. I'd started to with that fourth and fifth step, but it was just scratching the surface. And I had a moment where increasingly by I was coming up on 4 years clean, and now I had a reputation that I was trying to protect. So my honesty kind of went out the window, and I was starting to, a lot of behaviors were coming up that I was ashamed of and wouldn't share with anybody because I was trying to protect my reputation. And I did some pretty bad things. I did everything but get high. And it all blew up. And I wound up on this train in New Jersey when the full truth of my situation, the full truth of my addiction smacked me in the face. And I just realized it was only working with the sponsor later that I came to realize that was a surrender. That was a deeper surrender than I'd had when I first got clean. And I got off. I was supposed to be going to DC on that train, and for some reason I got off in Philadelphia. And in the train station in Philadelphia, a kid that I had sponsored down in Maryland found me, and he took me to a meeting where I met my sponsor, the sponsor that took me all the way through the 12 steps. And it took me 3 months to ask that guy to sponsor me because I thought it was too late for me. This was a meeting where there actually was 12-step recovery, and I would watch. I was just very quietly sitting in the back of this meeting, and the one thing I liked was they didn't care about my reputation. That group was just all about 12 steps. They didn't care what was going on in the rest of NA. They were about helping the newcomer go through the 12 steps. And if you were either part of that or if you weren't, you were welcome to come and just hang out. And that's what I was doing. And I'd watch people come in, really, really messed up. And like a few weeks later, they'd be happy and smiling, and they'd have sponsors or going through the steps, and I thought it's too late for me. And then one this lady shared, and it was like she described my insanity to a T, and I was like, I'd seen her around, and she came from this dark world that I was currently living in, a world of lust and just really darkness, and she'd come from that same world, and I could see that she no longer was living there. And I would later learn that was my second step experience when I had the thought, well, maybe what fixed her could fix me, And I asked someone to sponsor me after that, and that sponsor, I'm to this day, I'm so grateful to that sponsor because it really saved my life. And he just shared with me what worked for him. He made it very clear to me that he made it clear that I shouldn't put him on a pedestal. I shouldn't, attribute anything to him. He said anything that I get from him is coming from his higher power. And the whole point of our working together was for to help me connect with my higher power. And and he said, you don't even have to know or understand what that is. You will come to figure it out. He said, you just have to believe that that will work. And when we got to the third step, he warned me. He said, be careful here. He said, because, once you take this step, there's really no going back. And he said, if you completely give yourself to this simple program, even you won't be able to screw it up. And I was like, this guy knew me too. At that point, he had taken the time to get to know me, where I came from. And, and that was 38 years ago. And I tell you, there are times I think I've tried really hard to screw it up, but I haven't been able to yet, because I did completely give myself to this simple program. And, he walked me through the rest of the steps, and, and then, part of the deal, he said, was that we do this so that we can pass it on to the next person. There's a 3rd step prayer in the AA Big Book that talks about that. And he just told me, do this with all the sincerity that you can muster. And he said, and that will be enough. And because I had some doubts about my own sincerity. I'd made a lot of promises that I couldn't keep. And it turned out that was enough, and it's been enough. So for a long time, I did sponsor people, but I just didn't feel like, Joe spoke with this humble authority when he spoke. I mean, he spoke like he really knew what he was talking about, but not from an ego place. And I would try to emulate that. And, sometimes I felt like I was just, trying to copy him, and I wasn't really myself or whatever. But I did sponsor a number of people. But somewhere along the line, I feel like something did change. And I know what happened. After many years of being, I was very involved for a while, and then I kind of got into my life. I continued to practice 10 and 11 and 12 on a daily basis as best I could. And, and that's when I kind of did my journey through a lot of these different fellowships that I talked about, because, just things happened, and we'd need a whole another session to talk about all that. But suffice it to say, I eventually, I ran into this guy. It was like, this would have been like 8 years ago. I ran into this guy who had been part of that group where I found recovery. And we hadn't seen each other in 25 years. And he wound up sponsoring me. I hadn't had a sponsor in a long time. And we went back through the steps. And, and I walked into a meeting in town, and I realized this is where I belong. I need to, so I got back involved with 12-step recovery. And pretty early on, this kid asked me to sponsor him. And he walked up to me and he said, "How much time do you have?" And, like, to me, it's like, I've never been a big, fan of counting time, and I wanted to say something smart, like, what does that matter? But I didn't. I just said, I got 36 years, I think, at the time. And he said, he said, "Could you help me with the steps?" And I said, "Yeah," and we sat down and we shared, we got to know each other. And I was like, when he told me later that when he knew that I was like him was when I was telling him how I'd gone back to playing softball in my 50s. And I started out playing 20 games a year, but before I was done, I was playing 120 games a year. And he said, you're definitely like me, Somehow that was the thing that made him connect with me. But I was able to walk with him all the way through the 12 steps, and I watched his life transform, and it was a miraculous thing. And I realized, I think what had finally happened was I'd learned to get myself out of the way enough that it was no longer about me. I didn't worry about whether I was coming off right or whether I was telling him the exact right things. I had to pray and trust my higher power that was working through me. And this kid, just watching him, it was, the thing where they say that a sponsor gets as much or more from it as the sponsee does, it is so true. I couldn't believe I was learning so much from Chris. And, and then a funny thing, we moved 3 years ago. We moved down here to Fredericksburg from we lived up in Vienna, Virginia. Moved down to Fredericksburg, and I just wound up walking back into an NA meeting. I hadn't been to NA in many years, and I realized I was home. I just knew I was home. And at my second meeting, I got my the first NA sponsor I'd had since that guy, the guy who walked me all through the 12 steps. And they took me back through we went back right through the literature, the NA literature. I'd never actually gone through the steps with the NA version of things. And this person felt it was kind of important so that I could, be in a position to really help other addicts in NA. So we went back through, we used two different guides. We went through the steps, we went through the traditions as well. And it's amazing how much the traditions apply in our lives. And when we actually work the traditions, like we work the steps, it's amazing how much, I didn't realize how much I had really applied the traditions through the years. But then a funny thing happened right after that is even before the pandemic hit, I don't remember how we wound up connecting, but I started sponsoring this guy from Liverpool, England, and we were meeting using Facebook Messenger or something to interface, and it worked really well, and we were able to connect, and then the pandemic happened, and I was really wondering, how's this going to work? I'm a pretty gregarious person. I'm used to I have a broad network. I have a lot of people that I meet, and I wasn't sure how this was going to play out for me. And I'm still kind of quarantined because I'm high risk for if and my wife is even higher risk than I am. She's not sure if she would survive if she got COVID. So we're laying real low. I still work full time, but I have the luxury of being able to work from home now. And, being able to work from home gave me an extra 3 or 4 hours in my day because I have this killer commute to DC every day when I was working up there. And now I just have to go in once a week. And somehow, everything just kind of conspired and people started finding me. I was going to meetings all over the world because you could, when everybody went inside, Zoom meetings just really took off. And, and I just was, I found that I went to a lot of meetings that first year, especially. I went to meetings, I was asked to speak at meetings all over the world because I guess, something I didn't realize when I came back into NA, after being away all that time, there was a lot of people that still remembered me from way back when, because like I was involved with putting the book together. And it was kind of funny. I kind of felt like if anybody's ever seen the show Hamilton, there's a scene where Thomas Jefferson's been off gallivanting in France for years while they fought the Revolutionary War, and then he comes waltzing back in, and he kind of says, "Hey, I'm back. What did I miss?" I've kind of felt like Thomas Jefferson in that way because I'm like I had a lot of ground to catch up on because I've been away from NA for a long time, but the person who had sponsored I found at that second meeting was just wonderful and really helped me to understand how these steps work, for addicts, and how to kind of talk the language. And the next, I just started sponsoring people all over. I guess I have sponsees in 6 different countries and 7 different states in this country, and I have the time. And it's not a drain at all because I'm getting I feel more connected to my higher power, to spirit, than ever because when you're working with somebody else, you really need to. You need to get out of the way. So, I need to be there for them. I need to understand where they're coming from. One of the things I've discovered is most important is when you're first starting to sponsor somebody, when I'm starting to sponsor somebody, because I don't want to sit here and tell anyone else what they should do, but I just share my experience, strength, and hope. And what I found is get to know them. Don't just start in on what I know and share all my experience, strength, and hope, because I might just go right over their head if I'm not connecting with them. So it's really important for me to spend some time getting to know who this is I'm working with. And because I do have some experience in a number of different fellowships, I might have someone who it would be more appropriate to go through the steps from the AA Big Book than it is to go through with the NA literature. I've got one guy that we've kind of figured that out because he was trying to figure out where he belonged. And And he was more drawn to the AA big book. So we're working with that. Most of the people I work with now, I am working with the NA literature, because most of them are, they're finding me through NA, and and I just find it really remarkable to watch. I got one guy who I meet every Monday morning, and we go for a couple mile walk, and then we go through steps. And that's the only person that I'm interacting with live and in person. And even him, for the first year and a half, it was doing all on Zoom. I set up a Zoom account to meet with folks. And the important thing is just being there for them and sharing my experience, strength, and hope, and not worrying about doing it perfectly or right, just to be open to wherever this relationship goes, and understanding that they're gonna find their higher power if me and my higher power are doing our job. And I might not even understand our higher power, but if it works for them, that's great. I have one sponsee who's found their higher power is multiple gods, like the Greek gods, and I'm like, hey, if it's working, that's beautiful. And I have one person who's pretty much like Buddhist, and I that really, I get into that as well. But it's not our job to define their higher power. It's our job to introduce them to their higher power, and say, hey, this is the way my sponsor put it was, there will come a time when the only thing that stands between you and disaster will be your relationship with your higher power. And that's proven many times, and many times over, and that relationship gets stronger each time we go through a difficult time, and we turn to prayer. To me, prayer is just so important, for me. And for me, prayer it's talking to my spirit, it's talking to my higher power. And, if I'm, the other thing, I'm just going to wrap it up with this, is the other thing that my sponsor told me, and I share with anyone I sponsor, is that, the most important relationship that I can have is the relationship I have with my higher power. And if I get that right, all my other relationships will be right. They'll fall into place. And that's true. I've been married for 38 years now. And for me and my wife, she's in the program too. And for both of us, we got to put each of our programs got to be, in order if we're going to, last, another year, and, there's times that's gotten a little dicey, but we always wind up remembering. It's like, when you practice this thing, and practice is important. That I also learned, practice of 10 and 11. I think we develop like a spiritual muscle memory that even when it's all going down and we're, it looks like things are getting really out of control, we go back to what we know works. We go back to prayer. We go back to meditation, and I guess that's about everything I have to say. I hope I covered the topic adequately. And I hope that somebody was able to get something out of it.
I love it. Thank you so much, Pete, for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. There's a lot there, and I've got a lot of questions, and we've got some questions that have come in from the live audience here. And I want to remind our live audience, if you have questions for Pete, please type them in the Q&A link there at the bottom of the Zoom window. I'd like to start off here with, when I introduced you, I listed off a whole bunch of different fellowships that you had been part of over the last, 40 plus years. How do you know, or how did you know, and how do you know moving forward what behavior, what substance, whatever you should focus on and go from, place to place if need be? How did that work in your experience?
Well, that's a really good question. And let me start with just the fact that, I believe addiction is addiction, and we can treat the addiction. Recovery is recovery. And if we focus on recovery, it almost doesn't matter where we're doing it. For me, I got this. I developed this sense of trying to go where I belong, and part of that is just it's a lot of it is intuitive, but it's part of it is just trying to recognize whether it resonates with me or not. I did when I was struggling with it. I had a serious lust issue that had kind of come back, and about 8 years ago, I was struggling with that. And so I went to Sex Addicts Anonymous for that. And, I went there long enough to kind of, for my own situation, and I got a sponsor. I started working with the sponsor, and I realized, this might not have, developed into a full blown addiction for me yet, but it was kind of a cautionary tale for me. And it just seemed, in working with the sponsor, kind of came that this was really it was a character defect that I had. And the problem was, starting with that sense of having a reputation to protect kind of thing, it became a deep, dark secret that I didn't tell anybody about. And that's where it almost killed me. And it would have developed into a full-blown addiction if I hadn't, done something. But my back was to the corner, and my back was to the wall, and it was threatening to tear my marriage apart. And so I reached out to somebody that I knew and trusted, and this person just, their higher power was right on the mark with my higher power. They told me exactly what I needed to do. I followed their guidance because I was desperate. And it really led me to, I went into 3 years of counseling that was just unbelievable. There were some deep-seated things that hadn't come out in my step work from my childhood that, or it might have even come out, but it didn't really, it was still in there. And we were able to unravel that. And I was able to see how much that was still impacting how I acted and reacted in life. And, I wouldn't, trade that. I wouldn't trade the experience for the world, even though it scared the heck out of me when it happened. So.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And going along with that, I mean, when you're working with others as a sponsor and they are coming to you with, whether it be character defects that are killing them or addictions, how do you help flesh that out? Hey, this is a character defect we need to focus on in step 6, 7, 8, 9, or this is an addiction. Why don't we try and talk about going to another fellowship and working with somebody there also, in addition to what we're doing here?
Again, wow, you're hitting me with some really good questions. And, I don't know that I have the right answer for it, but I can tell you, I'll just tell you one guy I was saying, he struggled. He definitely was an addict, and he we were going through the steps, and he was okay one-on-one with me, but he was really struggling with the fellowship aspect of NA. He just didn't feel like he belonged. And, he was doing a lot of reading. This guy was he was really trying to recover. And some of his reading, it turned out that he had some deep-seated stuff from growing up in a very, very dysfunctional family. May or may not have been alcoholic or addictive, but there's definitely dysfunctional. And he was drawn to ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And he first time he told me about it, it was kind of tentative because he was afraid I was going to be no, you got to stick to NA. You got to stick to NA. I just looked, I saw how different his whole effect had changed, because he was so isolated because he didn't feel comfortable in the fellowship. And all of a sudden he just seemed, relaxed, and, he laughed more easily. And I said, hey, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And he has found his fellowship in ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. That's where he's found, and we're still doing step work, and he still goes to some NA meetings, but his real fellowship has been there. And so I think as a sponsor, it's again, if we pay attention to our sponsees and listen to what they're saying, they might belong somewhere else. And the only way we're gonna know that is by listening and seeing, the things that I've, just in the step work, the things that I've seen work for others. If it's not working for this one, then we got to try something different, So it's just kind of having that open mind that one 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 thing doesn't fit everybody. This isn't a cookie cutter recovery that we're in the middle of here. We have some common elements that cut across all addiction, but within each one, there's a lot of complexity. And it really takes paying attention to that sponsee to sort of sort through it. And it's just a matter, I think it's like problem solving with them, helping them to figure it out. Because more often than not, the sponsee figures it out. And we're just the sounding board. We're there. We're that trusted person that they can talk to about anything. That's this guy. He figured that out all on his own. All I did was say, yeah, keep doing that. I kind of encouraged it because I could see what he couldn't see. I could see how that was really good for him. And he's thriving now. This guy's he's come back to life. He's full of life. It's great to see.
Yeah, that's so cool to watch that light come on and see the sponsee run with the torch, take it to the next person. It's so satisfying.
It is.
All right. Got another question from our live audience. This is from Amanda. Amanda says, Pete, I loved hearing your story. Getting to sponsor around the world is the best. New to the 12 steps and also sponsoring via Zoom, I work with a lot of people wanting to do the steps for a second time and noticed some sponsees are struggling with step 4 and finding that old resentments might be gone and they can't put pen to paper for a new one. Do you have any experience, strength, and hope on that? Like not finding resentments.
I'm not quite sure I understand.
So basically, these sponsees sound like they're having a hard time finding resentments on their current inventory. So, any thoughts on that?
Well, I can share my own experience with that, and I have when I went back through the steps when I got this NA sponsor. I just gone through them again about 4 years before. So, and working a 10th step every day, I was just like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to write down all those ones I wrote down on the last one. But, like I was taught to do, and like I encourage any sponsee to do, is prayed before I started writing. And this sponsor, what I liked was they had me write come up with the prayer that I was going to use and preferably in my own words. And so I had come up with this prayer, and it was and I did the prayer, and then after I did the prayer, it was a funny thing. It was an amazing thing. I started remembering I didn't currently have these resentments, but they were resentments that had played a role in my life between the last time I did a 4-step and this time. Eventually, I did, but they didn't get addressed that day in a 10-step. I ran with them for a while, and I had some, and they were justified. Damn it, like how it is, and they were really, things that had bugged the heck out of me. And I said, oh, I got lots of material here, lots more than I realized, and I don't think I would have even thought of it if I hadn't prayed, because the funny thing happens as we go on, we go to deeper, more subtle levels of, because in the beginning, I think we're just scratching the surface of our dysfunction, of our character defects. We take care of the big ones, in the beginning, but if we're going to keep growing, we're going to find these more subtle defects that weren't really an issue before because the other ones were so much bigger and more fun. So I mean, I'm probably going to wind up taking another 4-step in the next year or so, because I'm going to be getting another sponsor in the near future, because right now I don't have one, and I know I need a sponsor. So I have an idea of who I might ask, but a lot of times they want you to go back through the steps, and I'm good with that, and I know I know there's a few that I'm gonna be able to write about, because they've had it, and because some things they just don't get, we become aware of them, but we don't always get to fix them in a 10-step, and they do become resentments because it takes us a while, I'm still very human, and I have the whole range of emotions, including anger and resentment. They don't have the control on my life that they once did, but they're still there. I'm not ready to apply for sainthood quite yet. I don't think I ever will be, but
Yeah, I love that. And I was just thinking about this while you were speaking. While I don't have a current resentment where against somebody that I want to, take them, kill them, chop them up and put them in the freezer or whatever. I don't have those type of resentments today. Maybe tomorrow, we'll see. But I do, I have resentments every day. Maybe I'm hypersensitive to resentment and feeling like I was wronged or whatever it may be. But just this morning, the neighbor's dog came over before our dog was awake and woke up my dog, and I was upset at the neighbor's dog for that. I'm holding this resentment against a dog that, anyways, so those types of things come up for me every day. If I'm aware and, take some time with my higher power and work a 10th step, I can find a resentment every day, whether it's a big one or something that will get me drunk, get me to relapse if I just sit and dwell on it and play it over and over again. So yeah, great question. Thank you, Amanda. We have another question that came in from our live audience. This is from Rosie. Rosie says, hey, I'm doing my first chair next week. Do you have any advice for me? So Rosie's chairing a meeting here next week for the first time. Do you have any advice as to how that might work and how this, maybe we can tie this into sponsorship too? What are your thoughts, Pete?
Well, one, it's chairing it's a tremendous form of service, and when you're chairing a meeting, it's a gift, and the one, I think one of the most important things to remember is you're not alone up there. You are, everyone wants you to do a good job chairing that meeting, and that's not, I don't say that to put pressure on you. You're going to have the support of everybody in that room to do a good job. And, you really can't go wrong. It's just, being, I like anything else. If you do this, I would pray before you go on, ask to be an instrument and, and ask to be released of any need to control the meeting. Because if we try to control a meeting, then we might stifle the spirit that meeting really needs to have. Because every meeting has a spirit of its own, and if a good chair lets that spirit, unfold in the course of the meeting, and so more than anything, a good chair stays out of the way. Just make sure that everything keeps moving. So,
yeah, and that's kind of where I was thinking, and it's going to lead me to my next question here. But I want to share a little bit. I mean, you talked about, hey, turn it over to the to your higher power. If I give this meeting, as I'm chairing, to my higher power, and try and get out of the way, and all I am is the timekeeper or the making sure we keep moving person, it just seems to roll pretty smoothly. But the minute I try and become the director, actor, and stagehand and everything in between, I stumble and bumble, and everybody else, and it blocks the spirit of coming in. Absolutely. So my next question is something you said that your sponsor told you was taking step 3. He told you something to the effect of, hey, be careful with this because this is a big deal. This is a big deal. And if you take it seriously, not even you can screw up this process. Talk a little bit more about that, how the importance of step 3 has been in your life and as you work as a sponsor.
Sure. And I love that question. And I like the way you framed it. At that point, I was 4 years clean. And, even though I had I had given myself over to NA, okay. And my, in many ways, NA was my higher power those first 4 years. And then, that relationship started going sour for me. Service work became an addiction for me. And like I said, I was doing a lot of behaviors were coming up that I was hiding because I had a reputation and all that. So I screwed a lot of things up. I went to jail 3.5 years clean, and I had to show up every weekend for this weekend prison camp and go out and pick up trash on the highway, and it was very humiliating. And I just, like, when he said that even I wouldn't be able to screw it up, I thought about all those things, and I said, boy, if that's the case, I am all in. I was so tired of screwing everything up. And really what he was saying was, we were talking about a broader vision of a higher power than I'd had previously. This was a higher power that was, that I could completely give myself over to. and trust to run my life. And that meant, everything, the career, the relationships, the whole nine, that, and it was a great relief, first off, to really realize that I could actually do that. And when I made that, he sent me off to do that third step prayer, and he said, do it in a humble position. He didn't tell me to get on my knees, which at that time was probably a good thing, because I still associated that with my Catholic upbringing, which was not, but he said, get in a humble position. And I was practicing a lot of meditation for a few years, so I knew a humble position for me was sitting in a straight back chair with my hands on my legs. And, it was kind of maybe more of a Buddhist kind of thing, but whatever. But that's what humble was for me. So I did that. And it was just that humility, that sincere desire to not be the one calling the shots. Because I had calling those shots had landed me on that train in New Jersey, realizing that my whole life had just been, even though I was almost clean 4 years, I just didn't have anything to show for all my efforts. And, it was just kind of understanding that everything it's in my higher power's hands. And I have never forgotten it, I say a third step prayer every morning and that, but I took that third step that time, and I took it as seriously as he said to take it. And, I have not really been able to screw this up. I've come close a few times, but this higher power, by recognizing that this thing is much bigger than me, and this thing's all powerful, and it will heal anything. And if I remember that, how can I screw it up? My worst mistake will give me my best lesson. So,
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. And you've mentioned that instance on the train a couple of times. And if you aren't comfortable sharing details on that, that's okay. But I would love to get more details on why and how that was kind of your rock bottom, if you're willing to share that.
Okay. Well, and there's a time that I would have been very ashamed to even share this, but this happened. Okay. I was living down in Maryland in the DC area, and and I was just a mess. I was way over involved in service, but my life was a shambles. I'd finally got this job. I'd stayed on this one job for almost 9 months, and it was like my 16th job in 4 years. So it kind of meant a lot, but I couldn't stand the guy I worked for, and he was in the program. And there was a lot of things I just was like at my wit's end, and somehow I wound up sponsoring this girl. Okay. And, in NA, it's kind of it's not quite as much, men with men, women with women. There's a little more of a borderline there. Well, we were sitting in a coffee shop after a meeting talking, and she just looked at me and said, "Hey, why don't we just take off?" And I thought it was a good idea. So we took off, and, I didn't do anything untoward. She thought I would. She got really mad that I didn't. But, because that was part of the deal. But I kind of did it. I kind of used her to blow my life up, and it was really, it was just a really bad decision on my part. We stayed away for about 5 days, and then we kind of limped back into town. And I'd gotten fired from the job, which is really what I wanted. I hadn't, my best friend who I lived with was just appalled that I hadn't shared anything with him about what was going on, and things were a mess. So I was asked to come to this. There's a fundraiser up in North Jersey that this good friend of mine up there, and his girlfriend was dying from AIDS. She was in the hospital, and the only reason I went with the intention of being a comfort to him. Okay, and I went up there, and I fell into a one night stand with a girl at this dance there. And I was just a mess, because that was a problem for me at that time. I was a complete mess. And when Joe put me on that train, he just looked at me and said, "Pete, you need to take care of yourself." And he said it with such, compassion and empathy. I got on the train and I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? I came up here to comfort him, and he had to comfort me. His girlfriend's dying from AIDS, and he had to comfort me. And I sat on that train, and I just kind of started the gerbil wheel going. And I just had this realization that, all this stuff that you've done, all the work you've done, everything that you've poured into recovery, and where are you? You've just blown up another job, and it was really the second half of the first step that I'd never gotten. The life of being unmanageable. I had been trying to manage my life. And it was the realization that I came to on that, and it was devastating. It wasn't like, hey, I'm surrendering. It was like, oh man, I'm really screwed. And I just had this sense that it's probably just going to be like this from now on. There's nothing I can do. And I don't know what led me to get off that train in Philadelphia, or that it just so happened that this sponsee of mine from Maryland was in that train station, and he took me home to his fiance's home in South Philly. They fed me, and then they took me to this meeting where I met my sponsor. And from that point on, it was just like it was out of my hands. I had surrendered control and didn't even know it. And it was a complete defeat, but it led to everything. Everything changed after that. Everything.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That was powerful. And I think, it helps me a ton. And I think it'll help a lot of other people with that too. And I want to build on that with this next question that comes in from the live audience from Braden. You started off that share about the train thing saying I was over involved in service. Yeah. This question says, how have you found a balance between how much time you spend working with your sponsees, including how many sponsees you take on, and having time for everything else in your life, like your family?
Well, that's why we have a 10-step, and that's why we I look for signs. I thought I reached my max at 10, and then it's just like, somebody would reach out and you'd say, well, okay, we can find a spot here, we can find a spot there. I find that I still have enough time. I have time for my wife. I have time for my work, for my job. I have time for myself. And that's what I look for. If I find myself resenting the time that they're taking up, then I got too many. Or I got to look at that resentment and just see if I'm just being ridiculously selfish. But the fact that I get so much from them, I almost feel guilty that I get to be part of so many different people's lives, because they give me so much, and but it is a good question. It is something to keep an eye on. I have said no to a few because I've said, hey, I need to have a night or two where I'm not working with somebody. Because everyone I sponsor, we meet once a week for an hour, and then I try to be there otherwise. But there's that, because the expectation is we're going to do some step work together, So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And like what you shared there, my own experience, strength, and hope on this is similar to that. If somebody reaches out and says, "Hey, Justin, can you be my sponsor?" My response is, hey, let's talk. Yeah. And then let's take it to our higher power. And if God tells me, if my higher power says, hey, Justin, I will make room for you to sponsor this person. And I trust that. It happens every time. Even when I think there is no way there is room on my plate to sponsor another person. If God says there's room, and it's miraculous. So that's my experience. Thank you for sharing yours too there.
Yeah, truly, you put it better than I could have. I liked how you put that, because that's exactly what happens. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Pete. Any other final words of wisdom before we close up here that you'd like to share with us?
Words of wisdom. I don't know about words of wisdom, but I just say, if you're new at sponsorship, understand that you can't mess the sponsee up. Okay. If you stick to sharing your own experience, strength, and hope, if you had a good sponsor, try to use a few of the things that work for you with that sponsor, with your sponsees, and you will find your level of comfort as a sponsor. Because I think, just like we're all different, every sponsor is going to be a little bit different in how they handle this. And just know that there isn't a right or wrong way to do it. there's we do the best we can. It's a program of attraction, not promotion. So we shouldn't be out there trying to collect sponsees. But, if someone's drawn to you, there's a reason. And there's something in you that sparks something in them. And, I think the main thing is just to always remember that our job is to help them connect with their higher power. If we're not sponsoring for that reason, then we need to take a look at that.
Thank you for sharing that. And that takes me back to one more thing you said that just really hit me at the beginning of this. You said that your sponsor said something like this: anything you get from me is coming from my higher power, and I'm here to help you connect with your higher power so you can share the same. So
yes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Pete. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. Everybody, please consider joining our private Facebook group. I put the link there in the chat. We also are on YouTube and Instagram, and we got a WhatsApp community that just started here the last week or so that's pretty active, and excited for that. If you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast on Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to work your 12th step in sharing this message with others. I invite the audience to come back next week, and we will be hearing next week from John R., who was a previous guest speaker on meeting number 97 when he covered step 7 in our 12-week series on the 12 steps. This time around, his topic will be addressing fear. This is a very common concern amongst us humans as a whole, let alone us addicts. So I think it'll be a really good one, I'm sure. I hope to see you all back here next week. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the NA third step prayer that Pete's going to say for us.
Thanks, Justin. And thanks again for having me here. And thanks for all who listened. And this is I love the simplicity of this prayer. So let's take a moment of silence for all who still suffer. Prayer. Many of us have said, take my will in my life. Guide me in my recovery. Show me how to live. Just for today. Thanks.
Love it. Thank you, Pete. Everybody come trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching